Thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring this video, more on them later. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know I like to complain about, well, everything. But more specifically, form factor. I love how comfortable the Game Boy Advance is with its wide childbearing hips, and I still don't understand how any full-grown adult finds this comfortable. But when it comes to the Game Boys that came before the GBAs, none of them are nearly as comfortable. The pocket is too small, the DMG is nice and thick, and the GBC is all about that bass, but all of them suffer from hand-holding syndrome. While I have already made a wider, more comfortable Game Boy Color in the past, thankfully there are many people in the community that are much smarter than me, like Froggo Customs. Chris not only rebuilt the Game Boy Color motherboard from the ground up with new components, but he also put his own Froggy spin on it. Not only is it more comfortable with its wider form, but it also has multiple quality of life improvements while staying easily pocketable. The question is it worth the time, money, and effort to build one? Well, let's just hop to it. What really excited me about this project was that it allowed me to use parts from my Game Boy graveyard. I unfortunately come across a lot of Game Boy motherboards that are covered in corrosion or unfixable in one way or another. That's the main reason why I love Funny Playing's new GBA motherboard, and now I can do the same with my dead GBCs thanks to Chris's work. If you have the skills to transplant the CPU, RAM, crystal oscillator, link port, and cart slot, you can have a brand new GBC motherboard with all sorts of upgrades. New amped up stereo speakers that actually sound good, a USB-C rechargeable LiPo battery with power LEDs that actually tell you when it's dying or charging, and of course a fully redesigned form factor that is arguably more comfortable than the original. This was once again one of the hardest projects I have ever completed. This is not for beginners. Like a lot of other redesigned Game Boy motherboards, you have to solder each individual component to the board, which is something I actively try to avoid. Thankfully, PCBWay sponsored this video to make my life a whole lot easier by assembling most of the board for me. Since Chris put this project on PCBWay with the bill of materials, I didn't have to worry about soldering any of the off-the-shelf components. PCBWay also 3D printed all the other parts for me since I don't have my own 3D printer at this time. But let's get to building this, shall we? Jumping straight in, I removed the CPU, RAM, crystal, and cart slot from my donor GBC with a desoldering iron, some hot air, and a whole lot of flux. I didn't end up reusing the link port since I have a whole bag of brand new ones I bought a long time ago on AliExpress. Then I whipped out my microscope and struggled for a while to line up all the pins on the CPU with the pre-applied solder. I ended up removing it to make it easier to line up before adding my own. Leading up to this, I had a lot of practice putting together a few more Funny Playing GBA boards, but for whatever reason, I was just on the struggle bus this time. With a lot of patience, I was able to eventually get every pin on both the CPU and RAM soldered down and wiggle tested with my dental tools. However, I had some very unfortunate bridging between these two pins. No matter what I did to remove the solder in that area, I just couldn't fix it. I was starting to panic a little bit because not only is this an expensive project, but also a sponsored video and I was in way too deep to call it quits. I thought about removing the CPU and all of the solder again, but I don't think that would have helped me. From the looks of it, I believe I had removed part of the solder mask and that's why I was unable to remove the solder. So I was gonna have to remove everything and transfer it to one of the other blank boards PCBWay included in my package. But before I went and did all of that work, I decided to take a chance and try scraping off the solder with my dental pick and pray that I don't ruin any traces in the process. My heart was pounding. I successfully removed the bridge, but it wasn't pretty. From there, I installed the cart slot and new link port with ease. Then I soldered up the new speakers, but not without struggling to keep them from magneting to my soldering iron. Stop doing that. After that, I wired up the batteries and connected an OLED display to see if this frog croaked. Hallelujah. I was starting to think this project was going to end up like the King of Far Far Away. But now all that was left to do was install everything into the new shell. The Frog Boy uses SP buttons and membranes, so I grabbed some classic gray ones I had lying around, and I also used the SP's motherboard screws since I didn't have any M2 screws on hand. These worked perfectly for all the screw posts on the inside and out. And only 3 hours later, the Frog Boy color was riveting. Again, this was one of the hardest projects I have ever done. I am in no position to make a full tutorial on this, but if you want to watch me struggle through all of it, you can go check that out over on the second channel, Jake64. I'll have that video linked below and in the cards at the end. And if you're wanting a real step-by-step tutorial, Chris made a great one on his channel that I will also link in the description, along with all the parts and other important stuff needed for this project. But after spending a few weeks playing this thing, what do I actually think of it? Well, to be honest, I'm pretty split. I love the new form factor. It's wide like a GBA and thinner than a Game Boy Pocket, so it makes it more comfortable for long play sessions while staying easily pocketable. And you can actually have some pretty long play sessions with the 2 LiPo batteries that are towed around in this thing. I also have to give props to Chris for the speakers. These things sound fantastic, unlike a lot of the amp mods for Game Boys that I normally steer clear of. Plus, there are 2 speakers for legit stereo sound. But let's address the elephant in the room. The volume knob. I did this project after Chris revised the cap for the potentiometer, and I honestly never noticed it while playing. That part didn't bug me at all. I actually don't mind the look of it either. But here's my problem. This cap is supposed to be machined aluminum, which makes it a $30+ part alone. That's dumb. So instead, I asked PCBWay to 3D print it for me so I could test to see if it was even possible to go plastic with it. And obviously, it is, if you very carefully superglue it on. It just kept popping off without any glue, and I almost completely ruined the potentiometer by gluing it shut. I fixed it though, don't worry. I know this is Chris's project, and he can do whatever he frogging wants, but none of this would be an issue if there was just a classic GBC volume wheel somewhere along the edge. However, I do like that the power switch has turned into a power button. The only problem is the shell doesn't fit the SP's brightness button too well. It's a little deep in there and can be a little too hard to press sometimes, but ultimately that's a nitpick. And while we're nitpicking here, I'm weird and I prefer the mushy GBC buttons over the clicky SP buttons. I'm not sorry, but there is one last big problem I have with the Frogboy color. It doesn't follow the 3 Ps.
The 3 what?
The 3 Ps.
What are the 3 Ps?
Price, price, and price.
Not only do you need a donor GBC, but also a new motherboard, new board components, speakers, batteries, SP buttons and membranes, a screen kit, a volume wheel cap, battery clips, new screws, and a custom front and back shell. And all of that adds up very quickly, putting it out of reach for a lot of people. And that sucks when the difficulty of this mod already puts it out of reach for so many. As cool as this mod is, I was only ever going to do it with the help of PCBWay. It's just too expensive, especially when you can't print the shell yourself because Chris has yet to make those files public. All that being said, I do think this is a really cool mod. It's just hard to recommend to most with the skill level and price tag it has. Plus, I hate to say it, but you could just mod a GBA. However, if it is something you can pull off and you think it's worth the price, I think you'll be pretty satisfied with the end result. Thanks again to PCBWay for paying for all of this. I highly recommend using their PCB assembly service for this and any other projects because it made my life so much easier. Chris, I hope I wasn't too mean because I do genuinely like this thing. Your YGBC is only slightly better than mine though. And once again, if any of you want to point and laugh as I struggle to build this, I'll have the extended cut up on the second channel right now. You can find all of those important links in the description down below. But that's it for me, so like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Later, guys. Oh, and shocker, I forgot the light pipe.